Hello, everyone. Welcome to JetBrains Connect, topics and talk from across the landscape of technology. Today on JetBrains Connect, conferences moved online and virtual during the pandemic. Did this succeed? And will this stay with us as things get back to normal? Or will we go back to the old ways or even some new hybrid? I'm your host, Paul Everett. Today, I'm joined by Martin Balial, JetBrains Developer Advocate, Team Lead for our .NET Advocacy, my partner in crime on lots of projects, never convicted. Welcome, Martin.
Hey, Paul. Hey, everyone. I'm Martin and happy to be joining you here today.
Also joining us today, Chief Commercial Officer at Web Summit, Kevin McDonald. Web Summit is Europe's largest technology conference. Good for us for getting Kevin with us today. And responsible for Web Summit's corporate, SMB, and investors and startups department. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Paul and Martin, for having me.
Guests go first here on JetBrains Connect. Kevin, pleasure to have you. Can you help us start first telling us a little bit about yourself, then how you got into conferences?
Back in the day, I actually ran an online video company, and I used to doorstep big conferences and trade fairs and try to convince businesses for us to stream, edit, and film a video of them at their stand. And then we would embed a private player on their website. This was back in 2009. So just around the time that WebSummit was built. I didn't work for them at that time. Got into tech since then. And I'm about 5 years working for Web Summit. So that's how kind of I got into it. Yeah.
I bet 2009 was a barrel of monkeys for trying to do video on web pages.
Yeah, well, the economy took a bit of a dive. So
Sure.
I had to get creative. I was a little bit ahead of my time, actually. Most companies were not really into online video. But conferences were a great way for me to capture them all in 1 or 2 days. So that was really my first experience of doing business at conferences.
And actually, ahead of your time might be the theme for this episode. So thanks, Kevin. We all have lots of theories about the future of tech conferences. We're fortunate to have someone with actual experience and maybe even evidence. Martin, you've been involved in this conference racket for a long time. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, exactly. So as a developer advocate at JetBrains, obviously there's lots of conferences involved, both as a speaker, as an attendee, and also at conference booths and so on. The story around conferences, for me at least, started when I was a new consultant, fresh consultant right out of school. My manager pushed me kind of into doing a user group talk. And at the time, I did not want to say no, so I didn't want to disappoint, and I joined in. I enjoyed that quite a bit, got into more public speaking and so on. On one of the trips, I think it was Poland, I met Hadi, who you may remember from other episodes here of JetBrains Connect. And then a good year and a half later, I joined JetBrains, doing more and more talks at the same time here in Belgium in the community, organizing user group events. We had a community day with all of the different communities just getting together in one venue and doing a bigger thing than just a typical meetups of 20, 25 people. Out of that grew a conference of 500 and even 1,000 people here in Belgium. That also kind of spilled over into JetBrains, organizing many of our .NET webinars, also doing the free virtual 2-day .NET Days online conference. I think we had it a couple of months ago in May. Manning agenda committees for quite a few conferences worldwide, actually. And it's interesting from that perspective to see all of those conferences trying to either go virtual. Some have been skipping in the past year and just decided to wait until in person was possible again. So I dare say lots of conferences in the past and in the future.
And that's something valuable about having you. You cover all of the audiences for tech conferences, attendee, speaker, sponsor, organizer, et cetera. You've seen the good, the bad, the truly insane. So you've helped me get this episode together. Very good. Thanks, both of you, for sharing your origin story for conferences. Let's now give some context on the core issue. In this case, it's pretty simple: the pandemic. We're talking today about what conferences will be like post-pandemic, whenever that might be. That requires, obviously, talking about what they were like pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Kevin, let's go back to the full year of 2019 and talk a little bit about tech conferences. And let's talk about each constituency: attendee, speaker, organizer, sponsor. What was the experience like, and what did they get out of it?
Well, yeah, like very different things for very different groups. So speakers, like it was a way for them to get their message across, um, promote their initiatives, their products, their companies, and have high level connections. For the majority of the other groups, it could be investment, obviously business. It all kind of boils down to meaningful connections. That's been our ethos. But it's a show. It's not just a tech conference, and sometimes people forget that, right? So there's many conferences where they fundamentally might be one thing before they are the other, right? So you might have the Consumer Electronics Show. That's what that is, right? It's 50 years old. If you got a piece of hardware, you want to launch it, you go there. South by Southwest is actually a music festival first and foremost, which happens to run a tech conference in silo to that. So that's what they were before. And I don't think, like, I'll have Martin elaborate, but I don't think the fundamental reason why people attend conferences has changed or is going to change. It's about those meaningful connections.
You bring up a good point that we sometimes forget what were the fundamental reasons. We've been on autopilot for not years, but decades. And sometimes something happens like a pandemic, and we all have to kind of step back and get ourselves recalibrated a little bit. Martin, as advocates, we kind of wear the attendee, speaker, and I guess the sponsor hat also. You, though, have also been an organizer. What makes conferences so central to what you do?
Well, I think as advocates, wearing my advocacy hat, that's an easy one to answer. We are the bridge between our development teams and developers using our products who typically attend those conferences. And as an advocate, we often go and speak. And I think communication is key to understand the needs of everyone involved in conferences. And as a speaker, you get those one-to-many interactions where you do a session. People are in the audience, can give you feedback. You feed off the energy. You get some sense of what they are after, what they are willing to do. So as an advocate, that's fantastic feedback. We also very often do booths, and we partner with conferences. And those are also nice because those are typically the moments where you have one-to-one communication with customers or potential customers. People are bored during a break somewhere. They wander around the conference venue. They get up to your booth and they start talking, asking you questions. You do impromptu demos. So all of that is really cool and really nice to have in terms of communication. As an organizer, as well as an advocate, as a speaker, as a partner, all of those things are very energizing, as I mentioned, but also very exhausting. It's typically long days. You start in the morning at typically conferences say, yeah, you can set up your booth at 7 a.m. and by 7:30 or 8 a.m. we'll open the doors, and then we'll have the entire day, and then the doors will close at 8 p.m. and then we'll have the attendee party, but you have to still be at the booth because people might come over and talk to you at the booth still. So really long days, but also very energizing. But they do take a lot of time when you're at the conference, long days, long hours. But also when you're organizing, there's lots of preparation that goes in. Even as just a sponsor, you have to make sure that you have a booth. You have to make sure that all of your branding materials are there. So there's lots of work that is there. At the same time, it's still very nice to give people a platform as an organizer. People can come and speak at the conference. And also from that, you get a lot of energy. I know as an organizer, every single time in the morning, I think, why am I doing this again? And then after the 2 days, it's yes, when are we doing this again? So it is very energizing, even though it's also very, very time consuming.
I don't know about you, but I always spot if our booth is beside the breakfast line, I know I'm in trouble.
That helps. Or lunch. There's a couple of conferences
Yeah,
that do
right.
lunch pretty much all day, starting in the morning, and
Yeah.
those are horrible.
For both of you, a hot take. In-person conferences, they're a grind for everybody involved. Martin, for you and me, it's not all jet planes and champagne, just a little. Sometimes you got to move around finding good Wi-Fi coverage, right, Kevin? They're not always
Sure.
eco-friendly. Lots of things involved. They're expensive. So for in-person conferences, was this pandemic a necessary jolt? Kevin, you go first.
I think it was. I think it was extremely beneficial for us to kind of build out our suite of software that we already use for our physical events. Um, but ultimately, like it's about, um, I guess, coming up with tools and software that partners, exhibitors, can use to measure more tangible results and ultimately connect them to the right people. So instead of, trying to get from A to B across a 90,000 square meter arena, maybe you'll have a feature in the app that will enable you to connect to someone within your industry or business or what be. So
Those are good points. Martin, any comments?
I think it's exactly the thing. I'm not sure it was the necessary step to stop and reevaluate things, but it is something that everyone is doing. Everyone is looking at new approaches to things. Some of those will probably stick in the offline world again. Some of them may stick in a hybrid world where we have online and offline conferences. So it's definitely something that had to happen at some point, just to stop and think about what we're all doing and why.
Well said. Well said. So 2020 arrives and things change. Kevin, first, and focus on your kind of lived experience with the shift to online only. What did organizers do? What worked and what didn't?
So I think that from what I can see, some organizers try to just completely replicate what a physical event looked like within their online and mobile platforms. So like, I've attended some online conferences where literally there'll be like a virtual booth. There'll be a fake person behind the booth. There'll be fake branding. And it's kind of like one of those old school 1980s computer games. Um, and like I think what we needed to do is reimagine what exactly attendees need to get out of the event, and then figure out the best way to deliver that to them via our mobile and web app, right? Which was we had already built. But yeah, I think that was the main mistakes that I saw happen repeatedly. Um, the on the flip side, I think the content itself, not having logistical constraints for speakers, that was a huge plus, right? It's not about getting someone to Lisbon or San Francisco, and that's not a barrier anymore, right? It's literally just recording sessions like we're doing now and finding time in your day. So less effort from that perspective for sure.
Which has some unintended or secondary benefits like diversity, right?
100%. Yeah. We always have diversity goals when it comes to our speaking lineup and attendees overall, but it's much easier to curate specific panels on diversity. Of course, what happened in the world across the states and other countries was very relevant at that time as well. So it gave you, if something happened, if there was a news story, you can adjust and curate a panel pretty quickly. You don't have to arrange flights and hotels and stuff like that. So you can talk about things that are fairly topical within a 24 or 48 hour period. Whereas at a
That's a good
physical
point.
event, it's hard to adapt to that. We always remember in 2016 Web Summit, we had 70,000 people attending. The second evening of it, Donald Trump was elected president. So everything that was planned just went off the agenda entirely, and that was just the dominant topic across all speakers across all stages.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And just to reinforce the point you were making about kind of the on-the-fly evolution from the beginning of the pandemic, trying some things to lessons learned. I know there was a conference that I attended, spoke at, helped organize, virtual booth, all that kind of stuff, that happened just at the start, and then the second iteration happened a year later. And boy, did they learn and get better from the beginning to the end, which is kind of part of what this episode is about. Martin, in prep, I think you said the audience might be burned out a little bit.
It's a typical IT answer. It depends. But yes, I do think there is a little bit of an audience burnout. I think before the pandemic happened, you would have to travel somewhere to get content, to get networking opportunities. Your boss might only let you out of the office for 2 of those conferences a year. But then the pandemic happened and every conference started to do things online. Speakers started to do more and more things on Twitch and on YouTube and so on. And I think there's just a lot of content that is happening, which is awesome because as an attendee, you can virtually go to any conference you would like. It's just logging into a browser tab and you're at the conference. I can attend conferences in India, in Australia, in the US. I just have to make sure that I'm awake for those things. But I also think that the downside of that is it's all just another meeting. It's all just, again, calling into something. And I do think Zoom fatigue is something real there. So I think in general, for conferences, it is becoming more and more important to not only satisfy the needs of those who are after pure content, because there's a lot of that. People have to be in a schedule, but they can also watch it on their own schedule on YouTube and Twitch and things like that. So for conference organizers, I do think there's a bit of a need to reinvent themselves in order to essentially convince all of the parties, whether that's speakers, attendees, or partners, that there is still value in doing conferences over just broadcasting somewhere.
One thing to note on that as well, sorry to interrupt, is one thing we found out, like the first online event versus the second one, you're dead right, Paul. There's so many learnings. But one thing we found out very quickly, whether it's an online or offline physical conference, as an exhibitor or a partner or even as an attendee, you need to put effort into attending. So it's not like, an ad campaign that you turn on and all of a sudden you make these amazing connections. You need to figure out what you want to achieve for it. If you have multiple team members coming with you, you need to brief them. Everyone needs to understand what their goal is, whether it's learning or networking or what have you. And that was really a shift that in our mindset that we translated to our partners pre-event. And back to the point, is it all worth it for the online events? Yeah, I would say 100% because, we're all here talking online, but if we were in person, we'd probably just get that extra layer of kind of connectivity. It's like, you can watch a basketball game at home tonight, or you can go, to the Staples Center or Madison Square Garden and watch it live. They're both going to happen. You're going to see the score. You're going to understand the players and all that kind of stuff. But your experience and how you ingest the information and the connection with the others that are watching is completely different. And that's live events. So yeah, to answer the question, 100%, it is worth the effort, in my opinion. But I'm a little bit biased. I run a big event, right?
Yeah, but your point about we've got to learn and get better at how we do these things is very valid, and I think applies to what Martin and I, as people involved professionally in this, have also been facing. So thanks both of you for helping us get the background set. We have a really interesting set of things to look at in this episode. Let's jump in. We've covered the conference experience pre-pandemic and during pandemic, For each of the four audiences, let's dive into the core issue. Conferences moved online and virtual during the pandemic. Did this succeed and stay with us as things get back to normal? Or will it just go back to exactly the same thing we were doing before? Or is there going to be some new hybrid that we've learned all these lessons from? Kevin, I'm going to trick you into going first since this is the hard part. Did the online only format succeed?
Yes, I think it did because of the learnings, right? So it gave us better insight into how to be more efficient, to be able to connect with people and how to measure success. Um, it's maybe a little bit controversial, but I hate the term hybrid. Like, I don't think a hybrid event works, right? Like, if Martin brings like a community of his developers to Web Summit this November, like the last thing they want to be doing is going home to their hotel and logging online and looking at some online content. They want to physically meet people. They want to see people on stage. But like back to that point, or maybe to take a step back over the previous years, like I think where it's going to be beneficial is archiving content, you know, aligning that content and marketing that content to specific groups. And also, I think it's going to be super useful to kind of mix an online event strategy with a physical event strategy over an entire year, right? So that there's space for both. But I already feel like that we had multiple online elements to our events anyway, as do most. Like, we would have streamed, I think in 2016 we streamed all of our 17 live stages on Facebook and YouTube, and we continue to do that. And now there's been evolving. Like, we had a workshop at Web Summit in 2019, which is our last physical events. AWS were running a developer workshop for about 200 physical event attendees, but they streamed it live to Twitch, where there was 2 million viewers on Twitch. So those kind of things were already in existence. And I don't think there's this like massive push. It's just really conferences need to develop a more comprehensive digital and social strategy is what I think the action should be. But I know there's a few events now that would claim to be hybrid, so I'm interested to see how they work.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we'll get in a little bit, we'll get to some of the research we did, which surfaced some of the things that remote people valued from online only. And then how do you stitch some of that back in when we get to next year, knock on wood. So we're lucky to have you with us to help us move from wild guesses to I was in the middle of it and here's what I saw. Martin, I know you've done all four roles for online conferences in 2020. I know you sat in some booths, some virtual booths. And from talking and prep on this, I know it kind of really sharpened your thinking about why we do conferences. Do you think online will be a permanent fixture or mostly go back to in person or something we haven't seen?
I think it all boils down back to what Kevin just said, in that conferences have to think about what they are offering their attendees, what they are offering their speakers and sponsors, and what niches in those audience they want to cover. If you know that your audience would be interested in having a panel live streamed, then why not have an offline conference but also stream that online panel? So I don't think online is going to be the only thing going forwards. And I actually think that the bigger conferences like Kevin's, for example, are probably going to go back to in person, because there's the element of travel, the element of having to meet people or wanting to meet people. And if you're not there, if you're not at the conference, you're missing out. And I think that's probably something that the bigger conferences might want to have to attract more people and make it valuable for all of the parties involved.
Are you saying FOMO's a thing?
It is definitely a thing, yes.
All right, now I'm going to invoke host privilege, and for both of you, zero in on a part that I don't think gets talked about enough: sponsors and what's in it for them. And certainly in this kind of transition for pandemic, our research showed the sponsors really were the heroes that kind of kept things alive, even in cases where they weren't getting enough in return. So, for both of you, would you talk a little bit about sponsors, why they're a critical ingredient, and kind of their value proposition for in person and online? Kevin first.
Yeah. So before the pandemic hit, we did see an ever growing appetite for more in depth content. So, on our stages, they're generally 20 to 30 minutes, the biggest names in tech. Uh, but if, for example, you wanted a deep dive type workshop, masterclass, um, we saw an appetite for that, and partners and sponsors and exhibitors were renting separate spaces throughout our conference and targeting developers or people interested in diversity or sustainability. And there was a huge appetite for them. What the pandemic helped with is essentially supercharge the audience for that in-depth content. And you see the emergence of similar platforms like the company Masterclass, right? Where people pay a subscription for expert, classes in cooking and anything you want, really. So we were all of a sudden able, instead of renting a private room where you could facilitate 100 people to 200, we could have 1,000 people logging in to an in-depth masterclass, and that would be running in conjunction to our main channels, which in the real world are actually stages. So it kind of brought in, I think, a more technical and industry focused audience for us, which is great for sponsors also, right? That's what they want. They want diverse workforces. They want technical attendees to help them build things and grow their business.
Yeah, Martin, before handing it to you, Kevin, I was at your Collision conference, I think 2018, and I saw the emergence, at least for me, of that kind of sponsor driven part of the hall for something that was a very deep dive. And I thought it was fascinating. Martin, you have any comments on this?
I actually wanted to tack on to that as well. So, as a partner, you want to get something out of the conference, whether that's awareness of the product or of the brands, whether that's lead generation, whether that's just getting product feedback, and so on. And it's really interesting to see how different conferences have been tackling that in the past year. Before the pandemic, conferences would offer you as a partner a logo on the wall, maybe a TV in the hallway playing an advertisement that you have. You could place a booth, a small booth, a medium booth, a large booth. And I think a lot of online events have been trying to convert that into online. And that didn't always work. I think we as JetBrains also made the mistake in the first year of the pandemic to go with a couple of those conference booths online. I actually think at Collision last year, we had a booth and we had very, very few people turn up. But that was also because we didn't reevaluate our position there and not start to think, what do we want to get out of this conference? So this year at Collision, I like to think that we did a lot better with having one of those master classes and essentially bringing in the audience that we wanted to have as a sponsor, to hearing us out, to getting proper one-on-one or one-to-many feedback that is better than just sitting there waiting for someone to pop into your virtual booths.
Yeah, exactly. And we had always had this philosophy, and we used to always say to partners and exhibitors, what can you do to add to the attendee experience? Now, some were more receptive to that philosophy than others. Some companies just want to push out their product and sell, and oftentimes you can be like the fat cat, right? You can just get an exit. Like if you're in the travel industry, and we have Gillian Tans, the chairwoman of the Priceline Group and Booking.com, speaking on stage. You're going to have people with that industry coming to see her speak on stage, and your booth is going to be in and around the same vicinity. But now in the online space, it was very easy for us to convince people, okay, like what's so interesting that you have to say in relation to travel or travel tech, and what audience do you want to target, and how is that helpful to them? And that's essentially how you gathered leads. So the one thing that did not transfer was the booth, but then it made partners and sponsors think more strategically. And I'm hoping that's going to transfer into the physical event world once we begin again.
Sure.
There's one more thing that I also see, which is kind of interesting as well. I also think a lot of companies that I see online, the big names, Microsoft, AWS, but also we as JetBrains with JetBrains.net Days Online and so on, are instead of sponsoring every single conference that they want to attend, they're also organizing their own events because they know their audience, they know what they want from it, and the budget is pretty much the same. So I see a lot of companies organizing their own thing as well.
Kevin, I think during prep, you talked about that, the kind of narrow casting conferences is going to become a thing.
Yeah, and that's where I see a big opportunity for online events. And I think to Martin's point as well, the more knowledge that companies get and the more events that they run for themselves, the more efficient they are at the big tech conferences. Because oftentimes, for us anyway, we run an event that's multiple industry, multiple tracks. So sometimes you can feel a little bit lost if you haven't done the correct preparation. And gaining that experience through connecting with specific audiences around a particular topic. So we would run like side events around City Summit. We do a Women in Tech one, and we do a Planet Tech event, along with many others. That only just grows clusters of communities at the larger events. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It makes people at a mega event feel like they can get in their tribe and be at an event that is more tailored for them. So, to our loyal JetBrains Connect audience, take care of your sponsors. Be nice to them. They've played a good role in helping some of the free conferences and the subsidized conferences make it across this chasm. It's going to be very interesting for attendees and speakers and organizers and sponsors to see what 2022 is going to be like. With the core issue framed, let's have some open discussion. Now for a surprise. For this episode, we thought we could do a service to the conversation by getting our really talented JetBrains market research and analytics team to go get some actual evidence instead of just opinions. These are the folks that do our somewhat famous language surveys, but a lot more that isn't as visible. We've picked some of the findings to crystallize discussion. So let's start with the first one. I'll read out a little bit of information on what we found, which we'll publish a little bit later, and let Kevin and Martin dive in on it. Hopefully you'll disagree with each other a little bit so we can spark some of that reality TV show conflict that we write into the script in advance. We'll start with this one. 55% of online participants are satisfied with them. This one kind of jumped out in the research and surveys that we did. What was valued? They valued, the first one was 72% respondents was real-time chat with speakers. And that's one, Kevin, when we were talking earlier about a lesson to learn and to bring back to in-person might be one of those hybrid kinds of things. Virtual booths actually did better than I expected. 39% really valued that. 2 long-term changes predicted by all survey respondents, more hybrid conferences. See what I did there? I promoted conflict with Kevin. 77% of the people predicted that. Increased interest in video content and higher expectation to pre-record talks, 70%. That one jumped out at me as well. Kevin, we'll start with you, then Martin jump in. Do these survey results match what you think the market is asking for?
Yeah, we've already covered boots, right? So we didn't do boots. So we won't include that. I think I'm not surprised by the satisfaction rating, because I think people were yearning for, networking, right? So the folks that were really engaged in our online events, they were super engaged. We have this tool within our app, we call it Mingle. And what it does is it essentially matches you with someone, and there's a countdown conversation for 3 minutes. So it's kind of like the equivalent of networking with someone at a lounge, right? You just might meet someone that's not planned. And we had several people that mingled for the same amount of hours that the actual event was on. So for 3 full days, they were just like hit and mingle
Okay.
and just networking their hearts out. And it was brilliant to see. It was a lot of work for us to set up because there's a little bit of matching when it comes to the algorithm and stuff like that. We want people to be somewhat relevant and talking to each other. So definitely not surprised about the satisfaction rate. I'm sure it would vary as well depending on the competency of the event itself. Um, and yeah, like the appetite for content and pre-recorded content is interesting. I think that can vary as well depending on the conferences. Some conferences are a week long, some are a day, some are 3 days. So if it's a day or a week long, will determine the appetite. But I still do think that um, having it live is really key, right? Back to the point about reacting to news and current events in real time. And I
Right.
think like
Right.
a core strategy for us is how technology influences society, politics, uh, the environment, and the economy. And they're really crucial things that we want to talk about, and that's why we bring politicians and policymakers to talk with technologists on stage. So I'm not surprised by the appetite for more
Yeah.
recorded talks. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember in Collision, you had some big names from the Canadian government there. And so, two
Yeah.
kudos to you. Mingle is a great name, and kudos for bringing speed dating to online conferences. Martin, were you surprised by the rate of satisfaction?
I was kind of surprised, but more from a speaker point of view. But from the attendee point of view, people seem to love it, and I think there's good reasons for that. Most conferences are something that they can join on their schedule. There's no need to be somewhere physically. There's no awkward venues outside of the city that you have to travel to, take an airplane to, find public transport, things like that. So things are just more accessible for people in general, and I think that's a big win there. Also,
Okay, maybe related to that, 68. We'll go on to the next one. Related to accessibility, 68% said the majority that they attended were free. Most had shifted online. Many didn't charge, which seems to lower the barrier to participating. Actually, Martin, let's have you continue the point you were just making about accessibility in the context of free.
Yeah, I think free is awesome because there's no cost in traveling. There's a very low cost in terms of attending as well. All you need is a computer or a smartphone and a network connection, so you can join the conference. There's also a couple of other things. A lot of people very often feel shy when they are in a session with a speaker and the speaker is boring or the topic is not what they expected. In person, they would have to stand up in the middle of a room with maybe 200 people. Now they can just close the browser tab and walk out that way. So it's much more accessible. It's much easier to leave any type of session that you're not interested in. It's just closing a browser tab in many cases. And you can still rejoin afterwards when there's a topic that does interest you later on.
Martin, do you see, for the events that you run, do you see a difference in the show rate, though, for people that purchase a ticket versus people that don't? Like for us, we see a considerable difference there. It's one of the why we charge for tickets. I don't know what your experience is.
It depends a little. So most of the conferences that I personally run are community driven, have a very low cost and so on. And most of them actually haven't been charging this year because their online sponsors cover the bill and all is fine. But in terms of attendee rates, we do see fewer attendance than registrations. So typically, I would think before we would see a no-show rate of 20%, people dropping off after registering. Now it's close to 60% of people deciding essentially on the day itself whether they want to join or not.
About how much of the cost of a conference do sponsors wind up covering? Not the profit or anything, just the cost.
The cost itself, well, I'm not probably well versed enough to like it's my job to make money, not to save it. But roughly like the revenue, right? The revenue that's earned through sponsors versus ticket purchasers,
Sure.
it's about 50-50, right?
Wow. Okay.
It can vary, obviously, and it depends on the size of your event. And it depends on the initiatives that you run as well. Like one initiative that we run is an open source initiative. So any developers that contribute towards open source, we give them an opportunity to avail of a heavily discounted ticket. And the same for our women in tech community. Generally, we publish like our first sale is a women in tech sale. So we get those like really key communities to hit like our diversity and technical audience targets. We get them to register early. Oftentimes we will charge because we want them to show up and they commit to the event so they can connect with other people. But yeah, roughly that's what you'd be talking about. Yeah.
Or does that match what you're doing? Because, you know, when I'm sitting here saying the words, the majority they attended were free. Well, it ain't free. It's just free to you, man. Somebody's paying something.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Although the cost is much less. If you have a physical venue, typically half of your ticket price is going to be venue, foods, and everything related to you just being there and having to be well fed and well nurtured.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends as well. Like, I mean, a lot of, we build our own tech, right? But a lot of other conference organizers would lease the tech. So that can be quite incremental as well. And one of the issues that we've seen is that like if you want to customize that tech, it can be quite problematic,
Sure,
right? You want to run it
yeah.
in your own way, in your own style, and you know it can be restrictive sometimes. So you know it depends on how much you want to build that out. Yeah.
Well, one thing I learned about open source, it costs a lot of money to give stuff away for free. Next point. Research showed that with online, companies made a big jump in the frequency of sponsoring. Brand awareness was the main goal. Martin, you have some thoughts on this, the paradox of accessibility, you call it, plus some company-centric event perspective. You go first.
All right. Yeah, I do think that sponsors are looking for new formats, no longer just having the logo on the website. Very often, like I mentioned earlier, conferences might just, or at least companies might do their own thing, not join a conference, but just organize their own thing because the cost is essentially the same as sponsoring an existing conference. And the interesting thing there that I witnessed at a lot of online conferences is that there is a paradox of accessibility. It is free or very close to free to attend many of those conferences, but many of those conferences are also organized by sponsors who have a certain goal of getting their products in the picture, getting their whatever in the picture. So you will see a lot more brand positioning, marketing positioning, and so on. And very often that actually leads to less diversity of thoughts in the conferences that you might attend. So things are free, which is awesome. And I think we should keep that and things should be much more accessible. But we also have to be wary of not losing that diversity of thought in who is organizing and why it is organized.
Yeah, when you and I were doing prep on it, this whole idea about the paradox of accessibility really covers a lot of things. Kevin, this next one's for you because of your perspective. It seems like the hardest hit in the conference industry or community or however you want to look at it, the ones hardest hit by the pandemic were the for-profit organizers. And this comes from the survey results, I should mention. The for-profit organizers who relied on it for conference revenue, they weren't really diversified in other areas, or nonprofits whose goal was to raise money from the conference itself to fund the organization's yearly budget, for example, PyCon. Does this match what you've seen in the industry about the ones that were hurting the most?
Yes, I mean, we made the decision very early on to go online. So I think pretty much mid-February, we knew we were going online, right? Before any restrictions were implemented within the cities that we work in and we have staff in. We knew we had good tech. So we watched other conferences wait till the very, very last minute before they were told that they couldn't run the event. and they hung on for dear life until it was an absolute inevitability that they had to close. So I think that hurt, right, and that probably did not give them as much time to renegotiate any contractual obligations that they may have had with their partners and even attendees, right? It was just a massive cluster, which there was I guess a little bit of a wave of negativity. So yeah, 100%. Like, listen, all of our businesses were affected, but ultimately, I think the ones that I think there was a lot of learnings, obviously, for within the first 9 months, and now you can see like two fairly big events in Europe are going to be kind of running in a hybrid capacity, but the primary focus will actually be online. Yeah.
Martin, you're involved in community organizing, community conferences. You seen this?
Absolutely. Actually, for the conference that our user group runs, we have to rent out a big venue somewhere. And they were friendly enough to postpone our payment on that to this year. And we're now asking them to, again, postpone it another year so we can have our conference next year again. And luckily for us, they are very willing to. But I can imagine bigger conferences with lots of upfront budgets having to be paid down are going to have had or are having currently a struggle in getting their conferences organized.
All right, let's book in the first point. We'll start with you, Martin. Attendees are satisfied with online. According to the survey, those speakers seem a little less satisfied for various reasons. This is the main reason that popped out when I looked at it. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. They like to travel. That's one of the incentives. Put a lot of work into preparing a talk and the time to get there and all that kind of stuff. And speaking to a camera instead of feeding off the energy of an audience is another issue. And they've got plenty of other ways, instead of just conferences, that they can get their content out. If we rethink conferences, will we compensate speakers differently? Or will we lose some of the speakers because of virtual? Maybe we've lost them already. Martin first, and then Kevin will wrap this up.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point to see that mismatch between attendees and speakers, definitely. Also, when I talk to speakers that I know, they're all saying the same. It's just talking to a camera. There's no travel anymore. There's no meeting, hanging out with friends, just talking with people and feeding off of the energy in the audience, but also just getting inspired by talking with people who may have had similar issues and are solving this in a different way in their program. And then you incorporate that in the next delivery of your talk. So there's definitely something that is missing as a speaker. And just like that move online from coming from offline conferences, I think maybe it's also time to rethink how we compensate or incentivize speakers to join conferences. I think the speakers that are there for just their personal brands or because their employer pays for it, that's all fine. But again, that also ties into that accessibility paradox. But I think to motivate community speakers, to motivate speakers to actually come there and talk from the heart, essentially, I think it's maybe time to rethink how they get compensated. And maybe even for online, this could be, yes, please present online, but after the conference, we're flying all speakers to one central location for a day and we'll hang out there, things like that. I don't know what the future will look like there, but I think to keep speakers motivated, we'll have to probably rethink that, especially if we only stay online. And it's also important to keep getting fresh people into the community, in the speaker circuits, and so on as well. If people no longer see that this exotic travel at 5 a.m. to Paris, if that's no longer happening, then maybe they won't submit to conferences and start speaking there. So again, we have to keep getting those people who are fresh to the speaker circuit as well.
Charles de Gaulle at 5 a.m. is a lonely place. Kevin, I wonder if you're going to have a campaign for speakers. Get out of the basement. Come join us at Web Summit next year.
Yeah, like they're people too, right? So yeah. I think there's going to be huge appetite. I don't think they need any further incentive. Like, they want to feel the buzz of the crowd. They want to travel. like, yes, we were able to cast a wider net and get some amazing speakers across many different areas online. But we've also been, like, most events, like, if you run a really good event and you have a certain ethos or ethics and strategy when it comes to your content, right? So it doesn't come across as paid for. It's thought provoking. It's innovative. Like Martin said, you're getting new faces all the time, and you try to stay on the cutting edge of what you're speaking about. You will always find people to talk to if you have the right audience. So yeah, I don't see like any incentive. Like currently we have about 18 different things that speakers do in addition to speaking when they come to our events. And what you want to do is just give them the most fulfilling and productive experience as possible. And you can definitely do that at online events. Like you can do roundtable discussions like this. And I think your earlier findings of speakers interacting with attendees, that's obviously easier online. But then when you get them to your event, you kind of own them for a day or two, right? So they're willing to kind of engage, deal with the local communities, learn more about culture, and that's amazing, both for the country you're hosting and city you're hosting the event, and for the attendees.
Yeah, I'm glad you put a lot of thought into that and taking care of speakers. It feels like this next generation of speakers are going to be much better than my generation of speakers. They've got more charisma. They've learned all of these tools. And now, I hate to say it, with the pandemic, it like gave them a chance to jump in, sharpen their skills, and be ready when this next round of slots opens up. So very good. These research conclusions were pretty eye-opening. So this was a good discussion. I'm sure there's more to come. Thanks, both of you. We try with JetBrains Connect to kind of dig into the deeper story, and you've helped us on a topic that's super important to the industry and obviously very timely. Let's close out with a From the Heart segment. Martin, conferences are so central to our advocacy job, to our industry. What's one thing you'd like people to think about regarding this online back to maybe a new thing?
I think all of us want to go back to in-person events. That's a given. I would love to travel to the US and be at the booths with you, Paul, and do impromptu demos when someone approaches the booths. It's just amazing to be somewhere, both physically and mentally, which is also important. It's not just a meeting. You are there, you are at the event, and you're experiencing it. It's just amazing to get inspired by other people in reality. But looking back at my conference schedule, I think if you watch the Hadi and Venkat episode of JetBrains Connect and listen to the amount of talks they have been doing, I'm actually wondering if we do need that many offline conferences now that we've proven that online does work, that there is a market for online as well. Is it always worth spending the time, spending the effort, and also spending the tax on the environment? You're flying there, there's lots of swag at booths. Do you really have to spend that, or can you just spend that on attracting more people in terms of attendees and in speakers to give better talks and provide better content for people out there? So I think in that regard, also attendees are the big winner of the shifts of going online. Speakers probably as well, but definitely attendees, because everything is on their schedule. They no longer have to spend all of the time. They no longer have to spend the effort of traveling somewhere. And things are just more available to them, which is awesome.
Your point about eco-friendly was something that was in the research, right? It jumped out to you and me that a lot of the sponsors and organizers actually mentioned that as an issue about we're going to go back to a way that has a pretty bad carbon footprint. Maybe we should rethink things. And you're right. I mean, we're not just pixels on the other end of a camera. We are actual people who need to hang out with each other. Ken, you actually, you're living in the conference industry. So unlike me, you have more than opinions. What's an aspect of the future of conferences that really should get more visibility?
You touched on it there. I think sustainability. One, like many of our partners now that are, uh, building exhibition booths and lounges have specific sustainable development goals. We are working hard on aligning with them and trying to run initiatives to help them achieve those goals. And I think us as event organizers, along with the companies that we work with, need to hold ourselves to a pretty high standard when it comes to that area. And we need to gather people together to discuss these issues, right? So I think that's one area. I think sustainability and diversity is another issue. It's a major issue in tech. It's a major issue in leadership within tech also. And there are companies that are doing a great job of that, and companies that are not. And we want to work with both of them. So they're two fundamental key issues for us that we want to work with our partners and people that are helping us with our content and connecting attendees and bringing people from all around the world to discuss those issues and put together actions. But I think like my hot take also is like, and it's always been our mindset, is that in this day and age of social meaningful connections are more important than ever. So it's building tools and meeting and kind of conferences, whether it's online or physical, that enable that. That's really the core of what we're trying to achieve.
That's it for today's JetBrains Connect. Kevin, thanks for joining us, giving us the organizer's perspective, and for being open to sharing your experiences.
Thanks for having me on the show. Really, really looking forward to meeting you guys face to face. Finishing off what's been a crazy couple of years, getting back to somewhat normality, but at the same time having another crazy year, but in different ways.
Well said on meeting in person, and we'll go sit in Martin's backyard and he'll cook barbecue for us. Martin, we joke in JetBrains that you're so productive there must be a Martin cluster running somewhere that includes conferences too. Thanks for being the one to start this episode idea and then to make it happen.
Thank you actually for having me and also for bringing this episode to fruition and pushing the research team to get this all done. I totally agree with Kevin. I would love for us to hang out and actually meet in person. But I do hope as well that we all start or keep looking at the accessibility of our events and have everyone or give everyone the ability to join the events.
Here's to the coming year. Let's make it a good one. Thanks for watching this episode of JetBrains Connect, topics and talk from across the landscape of technology. Don't forget to leave some comments about today's show or really any feedback about JetBrains Connect. Let's hear your ideas. Want more? We got more. Click subscribe down below. See you next time.